There are moments that almost seem impossible to explain. You sit across from someone, maybe over coffee, maybe in a crowded room, and nothing remarkable is said. The conversation feels ordinary, comfortable, perhaps even slightly awkward, yet somehow you go home thinking about her anyway. Not because she flirted, not because she admitted anything, but because something about the silence stayed with you. And if you've ever carried that feeling for days, quietly wondering if you imagined it, stay with me. I'd appreciate it if you subscribed before we go any further, because these conversations are for the men who rarely hear someone put their inner experiences into words. One of the quietest expressions of love isn't loud at all. It's restraint. Most people picture love as action. Someone reaches out, someone admits their feelings, someone takes the first risk. But in many situations, especially when emotions begin to matter, people often do the opposite. They become more careful, not because they don't care, but because they suddenly care far more than they expected. I've seen this happen more times than I can count. A man who usually jokes with everyone suddenly becomes unusually composed around one woman. He thinks carefully before every sentence. He types a message, deletes it, rewrites it, then decides not to send it at all. Meanwhile, the woman isn't behaving much differently. She also begins choosing her words more carefully. She notices the smallest details about him, but pretends she doesn't. She remembers something he said 3 weeks ago, then acts surprised when he mentions it again. Neither person wants to make the first mistake. Neither wants to damage something that hasn't even had the chance to begin. So, nothing happens. At least that's how it appears from the outside. Inside, it's anything but quiet. There's another fascinating detail that many people overlook. When attraction is mostly physical, people usually work harder to impress each other. When affection starts becoming emotional, something unexpected often happens. People become more afraid of being misunderstood than of being rejected. Think about that for a moment. Rejection hurts. Being misunderstood feels isolating. That's why someone who secretly cares about you may suddenly seem more distant than before. Not colder, just more guarded. You ask yourself, did I do something wrong? Sometimes the answer is no. Sometimes they simply realized you had become important to them, and that realization makes every interaction feel heavier than either of you expected. There's a small moment I've noticed between people who are quietly developing feelings for each other. It almost always happens without anyone realizing it. Someone says goodbye, they begin walking away. Then, almost instinctively, one of them turns around for one last glance. Just one. Not to check where the other person went, but to make sure they're still there. It's such a small gesture. Most people forget it happened within seconds. Yet emotionally, it often communicates something words cannot. Because once someone has already disappeared from your view, logic says the moment has ended. Feelings don't always agree. Still, that single glance doesn't automatically mean love. People look back for many different reasons. The interesting part isn't the glance itself. It's what usually begins happening afterward. And that's where the first genuine sign starts to reveal itself. The first sign isn't hidden in the words you exchange. It's hidden in the subtle way both of you begin protecting each other without ever talking about it. That sounds simple. It rarely feels simple when you're living through it. Imagine you're telling a story about your day. Nothing dramatic. You mention that work was exhausting or that someone disappointed you. Before you've even finished the sentence, she becomes unusually quiet, not because she has nothing to say, but because she's suddenly thinking about how you feel instead of what she wants to say next. That's different. Most conversations move quickly. People wait for their turn to speak. When affection grows beneath the surface, listening begins to change. There's more patience, more curiosity, and more moments where someone notices the emotion hidden behind an ordinary sentence. You say, "I'm fine." She senses that something is bothering you. She says, "It's okay." You notice that her smile doesn't quite reach her eyes. Neither of you points it out, yet both of you notice it. It's almost surprising how often this happens. It doesn't mean either person can read minds. It simply means your attention has become personal. When someone truly matters, your brain quietly begins collecting small details. Not intentionally, it simply happens. You remember the coffee she always orders. She remembers that you become quieter whenever you're carrying too much on your shoulders. You notice she laughs differently around certain people. She notices the brief pause before you answer questions that make you uncomfortable. None of these moments alone prove love, but together they begin to form a pattern that becomes increasingly difficult to ignore. What's especially fascinating is that people often try to hide this kind of care. A man may purposely wait before replying to a message because he doesn't want to appear too eager. Meanwhile, he's already read it 5 times. A woman may tell herself not to ask if he made it home safely, Then she casually texts, "Did your evening go well?" as though she hadn't been thinking about it at all. The message seems ordinary. The feeling behind it isn't. Sometimes both people spend so much effort trying to stay composed that they completely overlook what the other person is quietly revealing. Then something almost ironic begins to happen. The more they care, the more carefully they behave. Conversations become shorter than they wish. Goodbyes become quicker than they want. Compliments remain unspoken, not because the feelings disappeared, but because they suddenly feel too meaningful to risk. I've seen people mistake this caution for disinterest. They walk away thinking, if she really liked me, she'd make it obvious. Sometimes that's true, sometimes it isn't. Sometimes she's having the exact same conversation in her own mind. Maybe he's just being polite. Maybe I'm imagining everything. Maybe I shouldn't make this awkward. Fear has an incredible way of making two people behave almost the same, while each believes they're completely alone. But there's something even more revealing than quiet concern. It's what happens when someone else enters the picture. That's where hidden emotions become much harder to conceal, and where the second sign often appears before either of you is ready to admit what it truly means. The second sign usually slips out when neither of you is paying attention. It shows up in moments that seem far too ordinary to matter. Someone mentions another person. A friend asks if you're seeing anyone. She laughs, but not quite as naturally as she did a moment earlier. Or maybe you're talking about your weekend, and she casually asks, "Who did you go with?" The question sounds harmless. Maybe it is, but sometimes the answer matters to her a little more than she's willing to admit. The same thing can happen with you. You hear another man's name. You tell yourself it doesn't mean anything. You even smile. Yet for the next few minutes, your mind keeps returning to it. Not because you're possessive, not because you're dramatically jealous. It's because the possibility of losing someone you haven't even found yet can awaken emotions that feel surprisingly real. It's a strange kind of ache, quiet, almost embarrassing. Many people try to push it aside. I don't even know if she likes me, so why am I thinking about this? Because feelings don't always wait for certainty. Sometimes they arrive long before courage does. Now, this doesn't mean every hint of jealousy is romantic. People can feel protective or curious for many different reasons. Context matters. Patterns matter. What you're looking for is something more subtle. She doesn't try to control your choices. She doesn't become angry. Instead, there's a tiny shift, a brief pause before she answers, a question she wouldn't normally ask, a smile that fades just a little too quickly before returning. And you suddenly become more interested than usual in understanding who the people around her are, without planning to, without wanting to make it obvious. You might even catch yourself asking a follow-up question, then immediately wondering why you asked it, because deep down, you already know the answer. It's remarkable how often people reveal their hearts while trying to hide them. Not through dramatic confessions, but through tiny interruptions. A glance that lingers 1 second too long when someone else is talking to you. A quiet moment of relief when you casually mention, "No, it was just a friend." Relief is difficult to fake. It slips out before the mind has time to stop it. There's another moment I think about often. Two people are walking together after an evening out. The conversation has slowed. Neither person wants to be the first to say goodbye, so they keep finding small reasons to continue. One more question, one more joke, one more story that easily could have waited until tomorrow. From the outside, it looks like they're simply talking. Inside, they're quietly borrowing a few more minutes together. Time behaves differently when someone matters. 5 minutes can feel far too short. An hour can disappear without either person realizing it. And when you finally part ways, something unexpected happens. The conversation ends, but the connection doesn't. In fact, for many people, that's exactly when it grows even stronger. Because what you do after someone leaves often reveals more than what you did while they were standing beside you. And that leads to the sweetest sign of all, the one almost nobody recognizes until much later. The third sign doesn't usually happen while you're together. It happens afterward, when the room is quiet again, when there's no one left to impress, when your phone is lying face down on the table, yet your thoughts still drift back to the same person. That's a different kind of connection. Infatuation often chases excitement. Quiet affection often lingers in life's ordinary moments. You're shopping for groceries, and suddenly you remember something she once said about always picking the freshest fruit. You walk past a bookstore and think, she would probably want to stop here. A song you barely noticed before suddenly reminds you of her. Nothing dramatic has happened. No confession, no kiss, just a quiet presence. She begins to exist in places where she isn't physically there. If she's experiencing something similar, the same quiet pattern may be unfolding in her world. She sees a movie trailer and wonders if you'd enjoy it. She laughs at something during her day, then catches herself thinking, I should tell him about that. Sometimes she even reaches for her phone, then stops. Not because she doesn't want to talk, but because questions begin to surface. Am I bothering him? What if I'm the only one feeling this? What if I'm reading too much into everything? It's remarkable how often two people ask the exact same questions in different places, never realizing they're sharing the same uncertainty. Fear has a quiet voice. It rarely says, don't fall in love. Instead, it whispers, wait a little longer. Don't make things awkward. Maybe tomorrow. Tomorrow becomes next week. Next week turns into months. And all the while, the feelings don't necessarily disappear. They simply become better at staying hidden. There's something else I've noticed over the years. When someone secretly cares about you, they often become deeply interested in the version of you that other people overlook. Not your achievements, not your image, the quieter parts of who you are. They ask how your family is doing because they remember you were worried. They notice you're more tired than usual before you ever mention it. They remember that interview you almost forgot to tell anyone about. Those details aren't always proof of romance, but they are signs of emotional investment. And emotional investment has a way of putting down roots long before either person realizes what's happening. Then one day, something very small changes. Maybe you don't reply for a little longer than usual. Maybe she's unusually quiet. Maybe one of you cancels plans. The reaction feels bigger than the situation itself. Not because anyone is trying to be dramatic, but because when someone quietly becomes part of your emotional routine, even a small absence leaves an unexpected space. That's often when people realize just how much the other person has come to mean to them. But even then, many people still say nothing. Not because they lack feelings, but because they're waiting for one impossible guarantee, a guarantee that love has never truly been able to offer. Once you understand why people wait for that certainty, you begin seeing hidden love in an entirely different way. Most people believe hidden love stays hidden because someone isn't brave enough. I don't think that's the complete story. Often people stay silent because what they feel has become precious. Now there's more to lose. A stranger's opinion doesn't keep you awake at night. Someone who has quietly become important can. That's why two people can spend weeks, even months, circling the same feelings without ever giving them a name. Neither person is playing games. Neither is trying to create mystery. They're simply protecting something they don't yet know how to hold. If you've recognized pieces of yourself in these moments, don't rush to decide that every smile means love. It doesn't. Kindness can feel warm. Friendship can become deeply personal. Human connection is beautifully complex. But when several of these quiet signs begin appearing together, when you both remember the little things, when concern slips through despite your efforts to hide it, when time seems to slow down whenever you're together, and when every goodbye feels just a little unfinished, it may be worth paying attention instead of dismissing your feelings. There's a question I sometimes ask people. Not does she like you? Not even do you love her? I ask something much simpler. Who do you become when you're around her? Do you feel less pressure to pretend? Do you laugh more naturally? Do you find yourself wanting to be honest instead of trying to impress? Because lasting affection usually isn't built on performance. It's built on feeling safe enough to stop performing. And that kind of safety is rare. When two people begin offering it to each other, even in small ways, something meaningful has already started to grow. It may still need time. It may need an honest conversation. It may even reveal that your feelings aren't perfectly matched. And that's always a possibility worth accepting with grace. But silence isn't always the most protective choice. Sometimes silence protects fear more than it protects the heart. Sometimes one sincere sentence changes months of uncertainty. Not because it guarantees a happy ending, but because it finally allows two people to stand in the same truth. If someone has been on your mind throughout this conversation, don't take that as proof of anything. Take it as an invitation to look a little closer. Notice the patterns. Notice how you feel after you've been with them, not only while you're together. And if you discover that what you've both been hiding is genuine, remember this. The sweetest love stories aren't always the ones that begin with perfect words. More often than not, they begin with two people who spent far too long believing they were the only one, quietly hoping the other felt the same.